I have a stopwatch right here, so I can monitor how long it's on. So when you're ready to start, we can do this. Okay.
Okay. Anytime you're ready.
Hey guys, this is Cast for Closers, your podcast for dominating inside sales and hitting your quota. Today is a very, very special day for us. We are not only bringing our show Cast for Closers, but we are also launching our YouTube channel just before this interview. So we are very, very special. We feel very special. We are talking about starting a YouTube channel for years, and now we're doing this. And we have a very, very special guest. He was in Nepal the last time he was here on Vendas B2B Summit, and now he's with us again. Jeb, it's a pleasure to have you here with us. Jeb Blount, he's CEO of Sales Gravy. He has a lot of books behind him, all bestsellers here in Brazil, most of them already translated. And Jeb, it's fantastic. It's an honor to have you here on both shows, on Cast for Closers and on Vendas B2B Summit. Welcome.
Well, it's very nice to be here. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It was good to be here last year. Last year we were in Nepal, and today we are in Georgia. So we're ready to go.
Yes. Jeb, we are talking today about handling objections, right? One of your book's subject. And the first question I would like to ask you is from the beginning. What do you think that makes a question an objection and not just a curiosity question?
Well, I think this is a great question because here's the thing. In most cases, a question isn't an objection. A question is a question. It's I need information. And the problem is the way that human beings perceive or deal with rejection or experience rejection. So there's three ways. We experience rejection as anticipated, right? So let's say that you're in a closing meeting and you're anticipating that someone might reject you or give you an objection. Then they ask a question, and then you're already nervous, so you think that question is an objection. The other is perceived. So they ask you a hard question. This could be during discovery. It could be during an opening meeting. It could be on a prospecting call. But they ask a question. You perceive that as an objection. And that's a problem. We'll get back to that in a second. Or it's real rejection. So real rejection is, when they personally reject you. Get out of here. I don't want to talk to you again. That never comes in the form of a question. Never.
Yes.
Nobody ever rejects you in the form of a question. So what you have to think about is when someone's asking you a question, it could be a hard question. Like they could say, look, why was your CEO featured in a magazine article about fraud? Like that would be a hard question. But what you have to do in those situations is step back and give yourself a moment. We call it a ledge. All it is just a moment to give your brain to catch up with all the emotions that are stewing, because whether it's perceived, anticipated, or real rejection, the way that you respond to that physically is exactly the same.
Yes.
So when someone asks you a question, there's a couple of ways to handle it. One way is if somebody asks me a question, I might respond with a question. I might say, that's really interesting. Could you elaborate just a little bit? I always try to clarify. So could you help me understand a little bit more about what you're asking? That gives me just a moment to think. You could try to make sure that you can isolate it. So other than that question, is there anything else that we need to put on the table? So just to make sure that if they're asking a hard question, I can take everything else and say, okay, well, this is the only thing I've got to deal with. And also, if I may say, that sounds like it's worrying you. It sounds like it's something you're concerned about. Could you help me understand why? So they ask a question that's clearly they're expressing a concern about that. Could you just walk me through why this is a concern before I answer the question? Sadly, what happens is most salespeople, when they get a hard question, they get nervous. They treat it like an objection. They jump in and try to overcome it by talking through it. And instead of dealing with the question, they actually create objections because they're nervous, because they're insecure, because of all those reasons, versus just being relaxed and calm and just dealing with the question and treating it like a question.
Yes. You mentioned creating our own objections.
Yes.
Now, I've read it many years ago. On Spin Selling, we create a lot of objections ourselves as salespeople. So in your perspective, how do we create less friction besides like being calm? How do we create less friction in the sales process, Jeb?
Sure. So one of the things that we have to think about is one of the things that absolutely creates objections is your insecurity. So
Yes.
it's the way that human beings, deal with other human beings. When you're insecure, when you're weak, when you're passive, or in another way of looking at it, when you're trying not to be pushy, you actually create objections because people want to deal with confident people, not arrogant, but confident. So it feels like when you're being confident, it can feel inside like you're being too pushy, so you hold back a little bit. But as soon as you hold back a little bit, you create objections. And that could be true culturally too. So it's a little bit different, say, in Canada and America than it might be in Brazil. So if you're in Brazil, right, you've got a different culture down there, and sometimes that culture can be a little bit confrontative, right? So if you act a little bit passive, you're going to get run over. Like they're just going to run right over you. So that's one way you can do it. The other way is you don't know what you're talking about. So if you're not prepared, so you go into a sales meeting, you haven't done pre-call prep, and you don't know what, you're not ready for what you're talking about, and you get asked a hard question, and then you talk around in circles, you'll start getting hammered, right? And it makes you more nervous. So that can create that as well. The other thing that happens is, especially if you don't do good discovery, so if you're not doing good discovery, if you're not asking questions, and you're not getting potential objections on the table early before they're objections, you're asking people like, tell me one of the things for you that might be a deal killer here. Like that would be a lot of people would avoid that, but if I know that, then down the road I'm not creating objection because I didn't bring it up in the first place. That happens too. But one of the main reasons we just talked about it is you get asked a hard question, and then you talk yourself out of the sale. So you don't quit talking. And there's one more thing that salespeople do, and this happens all the time. Now, this would happen mostly in shorter cycle sales. So 1 call, 2 call, 3 call sales is early on in your initial meeting, your first time visit, right? The first time you meet with them, they throw out a red herring. I'm really not interested in signing a long-term contract. So you go through the sales process, you ask them questions, and at the close, when you're asking for the business, you go, I know that you really weren't interested in signing a long-term contract, and you put it back on the table. That was just something they said at the very beginning, and you bring it back at the end when you're closing, and they go, oh yeah, I did say that. They'd forgotten all about it. So you got to be very careful that you're not putting things on the table. And then finally, my last one is that when you are presenting your close, like here's the contract, you get nervous and start telling them all the terms and conditions of the contract versus just asking them to buy. So typically, right, when you ask, let's sign the contract, or let's go ahead and start business, give me your credit card, at that point, shut up, don't stop talking. Because if you just stop talking, you got to give them an opportunity to answer you. They may give you an objection. They might say, yes, I don't know. But if you keep talking, you're going to create objections where objections didn't exist.
Yes. When I'm on stage, I usually ask Jeb, how do you feel when I say the word salesman or salesperson? Mm-hmm. And a lot of the answers are liar, deceptive. So we usually don't like to talk to salespeople. So when you question, you don't like a salespeople. You don't look like a salespeople. When you do a great discovery, it doesn't feel like you're showing something off. I'm throwing my product at you. And this also creates a lot of objection, right?
Exactly. No, you're exactly right. If you ask questions, if you listen, if you build the relationship, if you focus on them, you step into their shoes, and you do your job, which is to help them solve a problem, you're going to get fewer objections. You're going to get more questions. I mean, if we go back to the first question, you're going to get a lot of questions. You're going to get hard questions. That's okay. Those aren't objections.
Yes. And it's just a natural part of the process.
Yes.
Being asked hard questions, right?
Yes.
So, Jeb, we talked a little bit about emotions. I've seen salespeople afraid of objections. I've seen salespeople changing the tone of voice, taking it personally, like this is against my company. So, besides of being calm, how should we treat an objection from an emotion standpoint?
Well, when we go back to what we were talking about earlier, so there's 3 ways that human beings perceive rejection. Real rejection, we've all really been rejected. We've all had our heart broken. We know what that feels like. There's anticipated rejection. That's when you worry about the possibility that you might get an objection. And then there's perceived. So someone says, hey, look, I don't have any time for you right now. and then you perceive that as being rejected, but you didn't get rejected. They just said it on me time right now. There wasn't a rejection. But it doesn't make a difference because the way that you feel about those is the same. And sadly, the way that a lot of sales trainers treat objections, or the way people feel about it, is they say, just don't take it personally, let it roll off your back. Well, it does feel personal, and it's really hard to let it roll off your back, and it does create emotions. Along with that, if you are a super competitive person and someone gives you an objection, then you get attached to winning. So then then it becomes a contest, and trust me on this, you're not going to win the contest. You cannot talk anybody into believing they're wrong. You just can't do that. So the first step in dealing with the emotion is just recognizing that the emotion is real. It is not a psychological thing. There's nothing wrong with you. It is much more a biological thing. Because human beings, if we just go back to the evolution of human beings, we go back 40,000 years ago, we were all living in caves and, in huts and teepees and things like that. When we lived in small groups of human beings, being sensitive to being rejected was important for saving your life. Because if you got sideways, if the people in the cave that were with you didn't like you anymore and they kicked you out, you were going to die. Right. Yes. So we evolved that sensitivity, and your ancestors who were more sensitive to being rejected or banished or ostracized, they were more likely to pass on their genes. And even today it serves you well, because if you are sensitive to being rejected, you work better with other human beings. You know where the lines are drawn. You don't overstep the bounds. Right. You're a person that people like. The problem for salespeople is that's one thing. That's good to have that, except for your job is to go out in the world and find rejection and bring it back to the cave. Like, that's your job. So if that is your job, if you have to do that, then you've got to recognize that the way that you feel is real, but there's no way around it. Like, you don't get to retreat. You can't go over it. You have to go through it. And the way that you go through it is that you have to face it. And you got to recognize some things about human beings. One is your emotions are going to transfer to the other person's emotions. So if you feel, nervous when you get rejected, or you feel fear and you don't control that in the moment. So because you can't control the way you feel, but you can control how you respond. Yes. So if you don't rise above that and demonstrate relaxed, assertive confidence, you're going to get way more objections, because when you're insecure and you're weak, people are going to punch you in the nose. That's what human beings do. Likewise, if you are a really competitive person and you get attached to winning, you got to recognize that you cannot argue another human being into believing that they're wrong. So what you have to do is step back, be relaxed, be confident, ask questions, and go through the process. The way that I've always dealt with the fear of rejection, or the emotions around objection, is exactly what you said. It is to run the sales process the right way. That means that I make a prospecting call, I set up a meeting with you, I learn about you, I make sure that you're qualified, I go to the next step, I do deep discovery. Discovery is where 80% of sales happens. And by the way, you can't handle objections at the close if you haven't done a good discovery, because at that point you have nothing. And since I do this good discovery, I build a great business case, I give a proposal, and if I do all of that, most of the time I don't get objections. I get people who say, hey, what about this, or can you help me with that? Or they'll even move directly into negotiating. They'll say, look, I really want to do business with you, but we need to work out a couple of issues. That's not an objection, that's negotiating. So in most cases, like, the best objection you get is the one that never happened, because you did everything right. And by the way, if you did everything right, if you invested in your client, if it's the right fit, right thing for them, you've got a good proposal, if you've done those things, you feel more confident. You've earned the right to sit down and have a conversation about any objections that they might have. But sadly, that's not what most salespeople do. What most salespeople do is they walk through the door, they talk too much, they skip steps in the sales process, they ask for the business, the person says, well, your price is too high, and then they think, I get all these price objections, but the only thing that they can compare you with is the price of the competitor, because you didn't do anything to differentiate yourself in the sales process. Like you said, you look just like a salesperson, not like someone else. So if you do those things, you're a lot better off. Now, one more thing. If you keep your pipeline full, this is the easiest way to manage your emotions, because if you have a full pipeline, you're prospecting every day, see fanatical prospecting, you prospect every single day. What happens when you have a full pipeline is that you can sell like you don't have to sell. And if you can sell like you don't have to sell, then you can walk in and people will lean into that. Like, if it doesn't matter to you whether you close the deal or not, it's amazing how people want to do business with you all the time because you don't care so much. And that doesn't mean that you don't care about your customer. It just means that you don't need any one sale in order to make your number. So it's easier for you to step back. And that's usually my best, my best prescription. Like if I was Dr. Jeb and I was writing a prescription, here's how you do it. It's fill up your pipeline, and that typically solves most of your emotional issues.
Yes, a lot of things you said are counterintuitive because we have ancestor genes that tell us to do otherwise.
Yes.
And I love the perspective on having a full pipeline. When you walk into a meeting, gladly happy to walk away. I don't want to win this deal over price and leave you with a problem, Jeb. So if it's not to solve your problem, please use something free. Yes. I'm gladly walking away from this deal. This shows so much confidence and so much honesty. And I'm not a salesperson because I don't want to win this at all costs. So it also starts showing confidence. And I love what you said about good discovery. I was scanning your book, reading it again. And when you set an agenda, we'll talk about this. We will do, like they say, an upfront contract. When you start laying all the things, the objections, it seems natural. The salespeople, the sales itself seems natural, and the rejections fall because we are questioned. We are having a conversation. I'm not trying to throw and to sell something at you. Jeb, about the X and O's, we are already on this session. You gave so much tips. Is there anything you left behind on how to handle an object? Like when you have 5 minutes to explain for someone, how should you behave when you give or when you receive an objection? Can you dig a little bit?
Yeah, the thing is for me is that if someone throws an objection at me, the very first thing I do, depending on where it is, and there's 4 types of objections that you get in sales across the sales process. You get prospecting objections. So you're asking for time. That's all prospecting is asking for time. Those are typically the hardest objections you get. They happen in a split second. So typically you call up, ask for time, you get an objection, 30, 40 seconds in, you got an objection. And those objections are harsh. You're going to get a lot of them in prospecting. And with those, the biggest thing that you do is that you need to know how you're going to handle it. So you're only going to get so many objections. There's only so many ways somebody's going to tell you no on if you're calling and asking for time. So all you do is we have a 3-step process: ledge, disrupt, and ask. So it's in the book, and the biggest thing for me is I teach people just use the ledge. So if you say I'm too busy, I go, that's exactly why I called, because I figured you would be. Because that makes sense, right? If you're too busy, you're probably too busy right now. I figured you're probably too busy. That's exactly why I called, because I figured you're too busy. So all I want to do is schedule some time that's more convenient for you. How about next Thursday at 2? So it makes it really easy to do that. If you get a prospecting objection, like the easiest, fastest way is know exactly what you're going to say, because it's happening so fast, you can't formulate a response in the moment. When people throw out red herring objections, so a red herring is simply something that they say or do that takes you off of the objective of the meeting.
Like a fake clue, right?
Yeah, it's like a fake clue, yeah.
I'm translating the expression here, Brazil.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a fake clue in a mystery, right? So you hear the music and then they point to someone's face and you go, "She did it," right? That's what that. So when you get one of those, typically happens early on, like in your initial meetings, and they go, "Well, your prices are too high," or "How much does this cost?" or "I don't want to sign a long-term contract," or things like that. You don't chase those things. You typically just ignore them. And you go back to asking a question. So go back to, okay, well, let me write that down. So I just write that down. When I go, "Oh, price too high." Okay, great. Tell me a little bit more about you. Because what happens in most cases, if I can get them talking, those things go away. Because they don't like salespeople, a lot of times they'll throw things out that early, or they're worried, or they've been burned in the past by someone else. Do you handle that? If it's a micro commitment objection, which all that is in sales, right? Sales is a series of steps. We ask people to do things, give us information, introduce us to their boss, meet with us again, go on a tour of their facility, have another video meeting, whatever. They ask for those things. When you get one of those, they'll say, "Look, I don't really have time for that. Can you just send me over your prices?" Okay, that's cool. I get that. Yeah. But what they're saying is, you haven't given me enough value to invest more of my time with you. So all you need in those situations is a simple value bridge. All you have to do is be able to explain why it's in their best interest to move to the next step. So for example, if I'm selling something physical and I'm going to be going to their location. I mean, right now we're in a kind of a pandemic right now, so not a lot that's happening, but we're going to be visiting places. I'll say, well, I really need to visit your location so I can do a walkthrough so I can better understand the space that we're going to be working with. They'll say, I don't really have time for that. I mean, it's like everything else. Why don't you just send me a proposal? Then I'll say, well, you told me that you're a little bit different than everyone else, and I know that since you're unique, it would make sense for you to have me come through and make sure that we're crafting the right solution for you. It'll only take about 20 minutes. Okay, let's go. All I have to do is explain why.
Yes.
And if I give them enough value, they're going to move to the next step. And then buying commitment objections, we've kind of been through that. But when you get to the end and you're dealing with a buying commitment objection, you've offered a proposal, you've asked them to buy, and they say, well, I need to think about it. Right? Well, I need to go talk to my boss. Well, I need to, we're looking at some other proposals. Well, I need to do this. I mean, the first thing you have to recognize is what they're telling you something that's insurmountable in the moment? So for example, if they said, well, listen, the way we're going to be doing this is we've taken quotes from 5 different businesses. You're the last one in. Our committee's getting together, and we're all going to sit down and we're going to have a decision on Tuesday. You got to make a decision at that point. Is that really an objection, or is this just the process that I stepped into, and I'm going to have to deal with this? Okay, so that's fine too. But in most cases, what we talked about earlier, when they hit you with something, hard question or what have you, just clarify it. Just go, how do you mean? I need to think about this. How do you mean? Help me understand what's worrying you about that, and just get everything on the table. And then once you get everything on the table, if you've done a good job in discovery, if you've had all the pieces, then you'll know what you need to do to help them overcome their fear, get past their concerns about taking a risk with you. So if you just think about it that way, I mean, the frameworks are all in the book, which I'm sure a lot of the people who are watching and listening have read. So you just go back through the frameworks. But most importantly is it's all a system. I mean, it's a human emotion, don't get me wrong. And it's human emotion, it's human psychology, there's science behind this. It's the way that we operate. That's why we have frameworks and systems, so that we can manage our emotions in the moment. We know exactly what to do. And all of the systems in the book are built around human psychology and just the way that we operate. Yes. Finally, I think most important, and I tell people all the time, look, you're not going to close every deal. You're not going to get every appointment. You're not going to advance everything in your pipeline. So for example, if I'm trying to get someone to move to the next step and they just will not move, it tells me a lot about whether or not that deal is even viable to begin with. I'm not going to win them all. The idea is to win more of them than you would if you didn't have the frameworks, right? So you increase your probability that you're going to close the deal.
Yes. And Jeb, my next question, my last and next question was over how we should differentiate the noise, like the red herring, the fake clues, from what we need to pay attention. You started answering that by questioning, by digging deeper. Is there anything you would like to add to teach us how to differentiate noise from what's important?
Yeah, so here's the way I do this. So if you were to go into a meeting with me, and I'll show you real quickly.
Yes.
So let's see, somebody's written all over this thing. So, but let's see if I can do this for you. I'll show you real quickly. So if I got a piece of paper in here, I'll just roll this up right here. So I usually have a whiteboard someplace near me. So you can see my whiteboard right here. It's not really a whiteboard. Somebody wrote all over it, so I don't want to write on. So I have a whiteboard, and I'm having a meeting with you, especially on video. If I'm in person, I just write it down. And you ask me a hard question, or you throw something out that I don't want to deal with right now because we're not in that place.
Yes.
All I do is I write it down. I'll write down whatever you said. I'll write down whatever you said. So is there anything else you want to cover? Blah, 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 blah. And then I go back to what I was doing before. So what I do is I acknowledge that they said this thing. I acknowledge that they have something that might be, taking me off of where I need to go. So I don't just ignore it and move on. I just acknowledge it. I just don't address it. Because what I want to be in control of the process, so that when I'm in a situation where it may be something I need to deal with in the future, I deal with it on my terms when I need to deal with it. So typically, you're going to get these things that take you off of of your trail or off of where you need to be, either in your first meeting. So when you sit down with someone the very first time, you'll throw those things out, Or you'll get them in meetings where you have a group of people, so you're dealing with multiple stakeholders, and there's usually that one person in the room that just wants to tell everybody how smart they are, so they start throwing stuff at you that's just not
Yes.
relevant. And if you chase those things, you'll waste the entire meeting. So what I do is I parking lot it. So I go, that's really interesting. Why don't we write that down for a minute, and then we'll come back to it. And most of the times I never come back to it.
Yes.
What you have to do is you have to recognize, once you write them down, you got to go, is this relevant or not relevant? Is this a deal killer or not a deal killer? Sometimes they are. So for me, I just either acknowledge it and ignore it, or I acknowledge it and save it for later. So
Yes.
I may say, earlier on, you told me that one of the big issues that you were concerned about is installing our product and then your people not using it. And I get that. It sounds like you've worked with other SaaS companies in the past. You've wasted a lot of money. So let's talk about what we would do from an installation and training standpoint in order to get this in and take care of making sure that your people use it. Tell me a little bit about what you think that would look like. So I take something early on that I can't address. I mean, the very first meeting, they go, well, what if my people won't use it? Well, if you spend your time chasing that, you're going to lose. You're going to fail because it's the wrong time. They're not interested. You don't have any information. You don't know whether it even makes sense for them yet. You haven't got them excited about it. So you don't want to deal with that then. You want to deal with it after they've gotten excited. They go, look, this is a really good product. I really like this. Then I would go, you told me that you were concerned about your people not using it. Let's put that on the table and talk a little bit about what you would want us to do in order to help you get it ramped up and get everybody using it. So it's all about,
Fantastic.
it's like the chessboard, right? You gotta know when you're gonna make the right move. So if you're gonna use your bishop at the right time in the right place. Don't just throw it out there and get it killed early.
Yes, and something you said remind me of. I usually, Jeb, when I hear random questions, it usually means they're just ventilating, complaining, rambling.
Yes.
So I write them down, as you said.
Yes.
And when they like ask 4 or 5 questions around a unique subject, okay, this is important. Like, Jeb, what's the cost of all this? What about an upfront contract? Is there any hidden fees? Is there service fees? So I'm giving you 4 questions around pricing. So this is important for me. Maybe my boss, the board of directors are asking me about pricing. So maybe this is important. So I usually pay attention. But if I'm seeing 2 or 3 random questions, I usually interrupt and say, okay, I'm writing this down, but why is this important?
Yep.
Like you.
And that's why you acknowledge it and write it down, because like you said, I've got a pattern. There's 4 questions about pricing. Okay, well, this sounds important, but I don't want to deal with that out of context.
Yes.
If I talk about hidden fees out of context, then if they're not bought in, if we haven't done a demo yet, if they're not excited about it, then I might create more objections or turn them away. So for example, let's just say you sell software and there's a professional services fee. You throw the professional service, I ask it all the time, is there a professional services fee? If the person says, yeah, there's a professional service, I go, how much? And they go, it's $20,000, I'm not paying that.
It's over.
So we're done. It's over with. Versus saying, okay, let's talk about installation. There's 2 ways you can install this. You can do it yourself, or we can do it for you. Here's what it looks like. Here's what's involved in it. Then you're making a decision in context. It's all about, like you said, and you're exactly right, it's about having emotional control so that you put those things in the right place at the right time. And all you have to do is just be relaxed. If they're asking the questions now, I don't go, I'll talk to you about that later. If I do that, all they want to do is talk about whatever it is. I just write it down and say anything else. Okay, great. We got those things. I'll tell you what, why don't we do this? I got a couple of questions so I can get to know you a bit better. And then we'll talk a little bit about me. And then we'll make sure that it makes sense for us to move to the next step. And then I just keep going. And once they start talking to me, a natural place usually emerges where I can say, okay, sounds like this. So you've been burned in the past. You had some hidden fees. Your boss got mad at you. You don't want to make that mistake again and look bad in front of your boss. That makes sense to me. You're not asking whether or not my product is too expensive. You're asking me if I'm going to make you look foolish in front of your boss.
Yes.
Those are 2 different things, but I don't know that if I don't do discovery. This is why discovery is 80% of the sales process, and you skip it and you fail.
Yes. Jeb, what a fantastic interview. I want to thank you again for being for the second time here with us. For the first time on Cast for Closers. So in the name of our own audience, let me thank you for being here with us. Please feel free to leave a comment, a call to action for a book, or anyway, to show your gratitude.
Thank you very much. Well, it's very nice to be here with you. Thank you so much. And I will, thanks everybody in Brazil for reading my books. I really, really appreciate you. You're awesome. Thank you.
Yes, when it's safe, we hope to see you in Brazil.
Me too. I can't wait to get there.
Bye-bye, Jeb.
Bye-bye.